In this video, we're going to talk about the safety of tonic herbs and how they're different from our typical understanding of herbs and working with herbs in our Western context. Now, it's important to understand the differences between these two mindsets and these two worldviews because in our typical Western mindset, we don't really have the understanding of herbs past anything more than just medicinal or maybe just something you add to your food to make it, taste a little bit better. So when you're coming from that understanding and someone says, oh yes, here's herbs that are tonifying and strengthening and balancing and something that you can take every day over the long term, it kind of throws up some red flags because we think of herbs as either just trivial, little food additives or very strong, very medicinal, very aggressive substances. But since our culture is, for all intents and purposes, a few hundred years old, whereas the Chinese culture is thousands of years old, as well as the Ayurvedic understanding of tonic herbs is also thousands of years old, you can see that there's some obvious disparity and some obvious ground that we need to make up in our understanding of working with herbs and the different kinds of herbs. So basically, in order to be classified as a tonic herb, in order to be in that elite class of herbs, because remember, there are thousands and thousands of herbs in the Chinese medicinal system, but only about 50 or so are actually considered to be tonics, and out of that 50, only about 10 or 15 are considered to be the super elite tonics. So in order to be a tonic, an herb has to be able to be consumed on a regular basis and used reasonably and intelligently without producing any negative or unwanted side effects. Because the whole principle of tonic herbalism is do no harm. Because if we're trying to improve our lives, why would we want to, take 2 steps back and harm ourselves in the process? It doesn't make any sense. So that's a criteria that an herb has to meet in order to even fall into the class. Second criteria is that it has to nourish 1 or at least 2, sometimes even 3 of one of the 3 treasures, which is Jing, Qi, or Shen. So that could be, Yin Jing, Yang Jing, Qi, blood, Shen. It could be any of those different things, but a tonic herb has to nourish at least 1 of those. And most nourish at least 2, and some even nourish 3, things like Gynostemma, ginseng, reishi, things of that high class, high esteem are all what are called 3 treasure tonics, also Schizandra while I'm thinking of it. So one way to understand the tonics and the safety of the tonic herbs is to understand that they're more like foods and they can be thought of as very akin to a forgotten food group or a 5th food group, because in older times, in past times when people lived more from their natural environment, more from wild food, they consumed these herbs in the form of teas, in the form of broths and soups, and they cooked with them and incorporated them into their regular diet because, for 1, they understood the power and the benefit. For 2, they didn't have Kroger or Meijer or Whole Foods to go down and get their food from. So, it was only until the last couple hundred years where we really just stopped doing that or stopped moving away, or we started to move away from consuming a lot of wild and indigenous foods and using them in our regular cooking. So now I want to give you a little bit of personal experience about how I've really pushed the limits of taking tonic herbs, and the somewhat negative side effects that I experienced from taking the herbs. Now, the first thing to know is that I went far beyond common sense and far beyond recommended dosages, and the worst thing that I experienced was gas or some indigestion or maybe some increased elimination. That was basically the worst of it, and that subsided as I stopped doing the ridiculous amounts of dosages that I was doing. Now, I'll give you some examples of what I've done over the last couple of years. Taken entire bottles of reishi, 2-ounce tincture from dragon herbs, either the Dunwood reishi drops or the wild reishi, was taking entire bottles of that in just 1 drink. Taking entire bottles of Schizandra goji tinctures, entire 90 capsule bottles of reishi mushroom. So just literally opening up the whole bottle, taking half a bottle of Hoshu Wu, ridiculous amounts of herbs. And again, the worst thing that I noticed was a little gas and indigestion. But The main culprit of that is that the company that I was buying my Ho Shou Wu from was telling me it was prepared, when in reality it wasn't, which is why I was having the laxative and the indigestive effects, because that's what happens when you take unprepared Ho Shou Wu, because it's not a tonic, because it's more of a cleansing agent, because it's more of a laxative. So that's why I really experienced that. And now at this day, some of the high dosages that I've done, 2 tablespoons of 8:1 cordyceps extract in a day, for weeks and months on end, feeling great from that. 2 to 3 tablespoons of 10:1 reishi extract per day for months on end, feeling great from that, no negative side effects whatsoever. Now, keep in mind, I've been doing this for years, working into those dosages. If you just go from nothing and then jump into those dosages, probably going to experience some cleansing effects, some readjustment, because tonic herbs are intelligent. And part of what makes them a tonic, which, to go back of the criteria to be a tonic, is that it has to be intelligent, it has to be dual directional and modulating on the different organs that it's working on. So some herbs work on the spleen, some herbs work on the liver, but what makes them a tonic is that they don't go in and just say, okay, I got to stimulate this, even though the organ might be already overstimulated. What the tonic does is it goes in and it says, okay, how can I balance this system? How can I balance this organ? How can I restore harmony and homeostasis within the system? And this is truly what separates the tonics from many other herbs, from the inferior herbs, from the medicinal herbs, and from most of the herbs that we're commonly familiar with in our Western culture. And this is really what makes them safe and ideal and suitable to consume on a daily basis and on a long-term basis, hopefully for the rest of your life. Because, like exercise and like many other healthy disciplines, taking tonic herbs gives you more results the more and the longer you take them. So, if you have any questions or comments, post them below, and I'll talk to you soon.